So hello and welcome to URM and BSI's How to Achieve ISO 27001 certification. I am joined today, and I'll introduce them to you shortly, by Wayne Armstrong, one of URM's senior consultants.
Hi everyone.
And also Tom Harrison, who's partner manager at BSI and has been involved in 27001 projects for some time.
Good morning everyone.
My name is Lisa Dargan and I'm a director here at URM. So if I just touch briefly on the agenda, we are going to cover what is ISO 27001, just so everybody's on the same page and we're using the same terminology, how it can benefit your organisation, the critical steps in implementing, and equally steps and tips for gaining and maintaining certification, and importantly, the pitfalls to avoid. Now, the slides and the recording is available after the webinar, if you can note that on your feedback form. And equally, if you've got questions, there's a question bar on the side of the webinar. If you put the questions in there, we will try and answer them as we go along. If we don't have time, or that we don't have time at the end, we will contact you afterwards with the response. So just to give you a little bit of information, for those of you, we'll start with URM that aren't familiar with URM. This is our 20th birthday year. We were 20 in June. So we've been around for 20 years, and we started way back when, with predecessors to 27001. We combine our expertise from a GRC type perspective of ISO 27001, GDPR, PCI, and other areas. So we've got a really rounded view of resilience, information security and privacy, which is key to this standard. And we also have a cyber team who are focused on testing, Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus. As you'll hear from Wayne in a moment, we have a passionate team of people. We have about 45, 50 consultants, and we have a passionate team of people who've worked both sides of the fence. So prior to being consultants, the vast majority have sat probably where most of you are, going, how do I make this work? How do I get management commitment? What is it I need to do? And then just touching on BSI, so as probably most of you are aware, BSI organise and write the standards. So they don't write it themselves, they bring in experts, people from industry to put the standards together. And then they are, from a UK perspective, they're the #1 ISO 27001 certification body in terms of number of assessments. So BSI is equally accredited to 27001, as are URM, so we've all gone through the same process to really understand this. So let me introduce you to Wayne and Tom. So Wayne's been involved with information security, it's quite a long time.
For a while.
Wayne's very experienced. He's a 27001 lead implementer, lead auditor. He's also a QSA, so he's got a very rounded understanding of information security. And he comes from a risk background and is a lead trainer on a number of other courses as well.
Yeah.
Welcome, Wayne.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming today. And Tom has got over 10 years at BSI. Primarily, he's really supported a whole range of businesses of all sizes and sectors in terms of certifying to 27001 and some other standards as well. And he manages the associate consultant program, working with the likes of us to make sure that we can come together and help organisations certify. Welcome, Tom.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think we've been doing this for so long, I need to update the 10 years thing. I think it's nearly 12.
Maybe good Lord, it's that long now. God, well, welcome. So let's start by, just to make sure we're all on the same page, what is ISO 27001? And Wayne, if I could come to you initially, just to try and kind of give us a high-level overview.
Okay, so in a nutshell, ISO 27001 is an international standard which focuses on information security management with consideration for cybersecurity and data protection. And when we talk about information security, lots of organisations or lots of people think about that being around the confidentiality side of things, you know, unauthorised access, unauthorised disclosure, that kind of thing. But there's other aspects of that as well, including the accuracy and completeness of information and information assets being available when you need them, etc. So we think about the CIA of information and the management of those aspects, so confidentiality, integrity and availability.
So when I think information security management, I need to think kind of those three aspects in terms of putting it all together.
Yeah, and understanding what your requirements are in those areas. So it needs to be aligned with what your business is trying to do, your business objectives, and then ensuring that you put processes in place to enable those targets to be met.
Okay, and ISO 27001, just so we're clear, is not saying, it's not forcing you to go, you must do this control, you must do that control. It's more about the approach you take to information security management, isn't it? The steps that you have to go through and showing you're on top, you understand your risks, you're on top of that, and you're continually reviewing and improving.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is what you just mentioned there briefly is the risk side of things. So understanding where your risks are, and different organizations will face different risks.
Got you. Okay, so ISO 27001 has been established as an ISO standard. I think it was a British standard if we're going to go way back, since 2005, with 2 versions published since.
Yeah. The
2022 version's got a new name. Do you want to just kind of touch on that, Wayne?
Yeah, so as I alluded to when I mentioned that 27001 considers cybersecurity and data protection, the title has changed to incorporate those ideas. But one thing to be clear about is it's not a cure-all type of standard that means that if you implement it, you don't have to worry about your cybersecurity or your data protection anymore. It will enable you to put processes in place to manage those things, but it's not going to cure all your problems. And there's plenty of other things that you could be doing in addition to 27001 that will make you better protected in the cybersecurity or privacy space. So a couple of examples on the screen. 27302 is an international standard around cybersecurity. It provides you lots of good guidance associated with cybersecurity controls. And 27701 is about data protection. One word about that one is that that's recently been updated. So those of you that are interested in data protection, you can now implement 27701 as a standalone standard. It used to be that you had to bolt it on top of, if you like, the 27001 management system. That's no longer the case. You can implement it standalone.
Oh, that's interesting. And will it still integrate? So if you do want to bring information security privacy from a controls perspective together, is it still going to integrate as it has before?
Yeah, because it's based on the same sort of principles that these standards are, that all of these kinds of standards are based on. So they all have the same clauses, etc. So you'll be on the management system side, you'll be very familiar with the requirements in 27001 and 27701, so they can be incorporated as part of an integrated management system.
Okay, and you've mentioned management systems. So around the crux of 27001 is the ISMS, or to give it its full title, start with Information Security Management System. What is that?
Yeah, so essentially as I've said, this is all about managing your information security. So in order to ensure that the way that you do that is reliable, repeatable, etc., it's worthwhile having documentation in place, such as procedures, processes, etc., that enable you to do those management activities in the same way every time you do them. So whether that's an internal audit or risk management or incident response, you do it the same way every time, and it's monitorable, it's measurable, and you can determine whether or not it's effective. And so the management system is all about putting those processes in place with underlying procedures and records that demonstrate that it works.
Got it. Okay. So if we look at ISO 27001 in terms of how it's structured, it's got a management system, hasn't it, which is common across other standards?
Yes, so the management system I've just been talking about in terms of the processes and procedures, I mentioned is similar to a number of other international standards. We call it a harmonized structure, in that it uses the same clauses. So whether you're using or whether you're interested in quality, so 9001, business continuity, 22301, 27032, as we've mentioned, is around cyber management. They all share this harmonized structure, so that if you wanted to implement processes for controls, the way that you do that, for quality, the way that you do that will be familiar if you've already implemented 27001.
Okay, and that management system harks back to that plan, do, check, act days, isn't it? That kind of model that you follow through the management system journey.
Yeah, I think we've got a slide coming up that shows how that is structured. It used to be way back in the day, I think in the first version of 27001, certainly in its predecessor in the British standard, there used to be a requirement for this PDCA approach, or it's also known as the Deming cycle. So you plan what you're going to do, you then do those things, then you do some monitoring and measuring to determine whether or not those things are effective, and then you go around the circle and you improve those things. So plan, do, check, act. Yeah.
So that's the management system, which consists of the clauses, which are the absolute mandatory requirements, isn't it? And then the controls, I was going to say are optional, but that's probably not the right word. The controls are selected based on your risk assessment. How are the controls kind of broken down? Yeah,
so the term we normally use is, instead of option, I mean, optional is probably a useful term, but discretionary could
That's
be another term that you use. So yeah, you need some way of determining whether or not certain controls are applicable. So 27001 is relatively unique among the other standards that we've mentioned around the harmonized structure, in that it has got an annex A, which has got 93 controls in there, which are best practice recommended controls by the standard. And as you can see on the screen, they're split into 4 sort of themes. So we've got 37 organizational controls, 8 people controls, or HR controls, if you like. We've got 14 physical controls, and then 34 technological controls. And different organizations will implement different controls based on their needs, and their needs will be determined by the risk assessment.
And when you say organizational controls, I get people, that makes sense. I get physical, I get technology. What do we mean by organisation? Is that more policy, process, guidance, roles? Is what kind of things fall in there?
It is exactly that. So it's ensuring that you've got an appropriate set of policies in there, that you engage with your interested parties, that you do that you maintain contact with specialist groups that will provide you information. You gather threat information that you can analyze, etc. So yeah, it's all about the organizational processes that enable you to do information security.
And they're referenced in the annex, the controls, aren't they? 27001. But there's another standard, is there 27002, that provides more information about them?
Yeah, so Annex A, the 93 controls, you'll find Annex A only has 1 or 2 sentences that tells you what the requirement is. So I'm paraphrasing here, but one of them will say you need to do backups.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tell you how to go about doing backups and what you need to consider around backups, etc. But so 27002 essentially lists all the same 93 controls, but it provides you a load of guidance associated with implementing those controls so that you can implement them effectively.
Okay, so just briefly touching on, we talked about the high level structure. So across the top, it's got the Plan, Do, Check, Act. Across the top, they're the actual clauses that we spoke about in terms of the mandatory clauses that make up the management system. Yeah,
so as you mentioned a few minutes ago, the management system clauses are mandatory. So if you read the standard from the beginning, it says in the introduction that if you are going to claim conformance to the standard, irrespective as to whether you're seeking certification, if you're claiming you are conformant with the standard, then all of these clauses from 4 through to 10, as you can see across the top of the slide, they're all mandatory, and you have to do everything that the standard requires of you. And as you can see, we've split it out there into what we would consider the plan side, the do, check, and act sides. And there's a number of areas within each of those that form the mandatory basis of your management system.
Got it. So when, Tom, when an assessor comes in to say, have you met the requirements of 27001, you're really focused on those clauses across the top. And I guess you probably only drop down into the controls based on, as we've got in section 8, the risk assessment and what controls you've deemed appropriate. Is that kind of how it comes together?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, on this structure here, it's kind of presented in a linear fashion with this Plan, Do, Check, Act. But actually, as you know, Wayne alluded to earlier, it is a cycle. So that sort of Act section will eventually loop around into next year, next quarter's beginning of the plan. So if you're kind of missing any of those individual pieces, it can really break that cycle, and you don't sort of see that improvement that the management system should be giving you. So yeah, it's what we're all going to be looking at when we do the audits. Got it.
That makes sense. Okay. So Tom, staying with you, in terms of actually how it benefits your organisation, I know BSI spend a lot of time gathering feedback, talking to clients. So what are the key benefits that come back in terms of why you'd look at 27001?
Yeah, so we assess all of our clients who've implemented and got themselves certified to ISO 27001 kind of every few years, and we produce this content in a bit of a survey here. So you can sort of see the top left and top right answers there of reducing business risk and helping protect the business. They're kind of the two of the sort of the key results we say. If you ever look at any sort of survey of kind of senior business leaders about, what's the thing that keeps you awake at night, if information security isn't the number one thing, it's certainly number two. So I think having something that you can point to and say, look, we've taken tangible, measurable risk to benchmark ourselves against international best practice, I think that's something that can add a lot of value and confidence into an organisation, and that's kind of reflected in that top middle one there of inspiring trust in businesses. I think if you look at some of the sort of the high-profile cyber attacks that have occurred recently, a lot of them have not actually been directed directly at the larger organisations, but up through the supply chain. Yeah. So steps that you can take to be able to show, we're a trustworthy, reliant, resilient organisation that's taking this stuff seriously. It makes you a much more attractive organisation to do business with. And interestingly, I think the bottom middle on there of increasing the competitive edge, I think the main reason people go for implementing ISO 27001, it's usually for something like we've been told to get it to win a tender, to gain access to a new government framework, something like that. In the news really recently, actually, I heard of a major high street retailer had said their profits had unexpectedly increased by 10%. Due to the effectively cyber disruption of one of their main competitors, which yes. I thought was really interesting. Being more resilient actually allowed them to kind of make money in a marketplace.
Yeah, their results were very strong for a period when their major competitor was struggling. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, I think when it's fair to say, a lot of people that we work with have maybe been thinking about it, have probably taken some steps around 27001, but the one that maybe pushes them to the next level to seek definitely certification is a contractual requirement, or getting bogged down with so many questionnaires, they want to be able to get ahead of the game slightly.
Yeah, and also it's a way of getting your foot in the door in the first place, because so many tenders now come back with a requirement to be at least 27001 aligned, if not certified. Yeah. And if you're not, you just don't get invited to the party anyway.
Yeah, and to be fair, how to demonstrate you're aligned? Actually certification, if you put the effort in, get the return by being certified. Okay, thank you both. So when we look at the critical steps in terms of implementing 27001, we try and break this down. This slide is just going to highlight those that we're really going to walk through, but these are the areas, isn't it, that typically organizations maybe struggle with or aren't able to adequately demonstrate it when we're sort of to start working with them through the implementation phase.
Yeah, to quickly go through this slide, because like you say, we've got a few follow-up slides. So first of all, you need to know what you're going to apply it to. You don't necessarily have to apply it to the whole organization. You need to understand where the requirements are coming from. So is it a legal requirement or is it a contractual requirement, as we've just been talking about? And that would come from, we call those interested parties, whoever they are. It has to be driven from the top. If you've not got senior management support, it's not going to work. Yeah. So they need to be leading from the front. As I've mentioned before, it's risk-based, this standard. Different organizations are going to be interested in different, or will face different risks in their organizations. So you've got to understand your risks before you can move forward. You need to understand where competency is important. So there are different parts of not only the management system, but also the controls that you're going to implement, where you need competent people in place. You need to be able to demonstrate that. You need to keep your people up to date with regard to what the current threats and trends and security incidents that are being felt by other organizations, and training them to be aware of those things and what they can do to contribute to your own security program. You've got to monitor and measure to determine whether or not those things are being effective, so that you can then make adjustments if necessary. And don't forget the business continuity side of things. You need to understand where things like that where failures might come from, and what you're going to do in order to mitigate that.
Thanks, mate. So to drill into it, and actually someone's just asked a question, in terms of the scope, does that have to be the entire organisation? So someone's asked a question around, can that be a specific service that's delivered, or a location, or have you got to look at the whole organisation?
No, your scope can effectively be pretty much anything. The main thing you've got to understand is you've got to meet the mandatory requirements in the standard. So you have to have an information security policy in place. You have to have management support. You have to be able to demonstrate that resources are being provided. So you've got to have the budget and the people, etc. So as long as you can meet those mandatory requirements, then your scope could be anything. And we've certainly got clients that range from organizations that exist in 70 different countries with tens of thousands of people, down to literally one-man bands who are running a software development firm, for example.
Okay, and I'm interested because I have heard this raised before. I think this was the latest version of the standard, maybe the last one. This was an update because there was a lot of rumors about broom cupboard in that sort of certifications as such. It must align with your business objectives, mustn't it? So you can't have a tiny scope that's probably got no value, doesn't really align with what the organisation is and where it's going, in order to say you're certified, can you?
Well, it depends what your motivations are. It depends where the requirements are coming from. So if you're running a mail service, for example, which is just one niche area of your overall IT department, and there's a requirement from a customer in a contract for secure delivery of email or whatever it might be, then it might be a worthwhile scope.
Got it.
But I think what you're alluding to is that it can't just be 3 IT guys sat in the corner of the office that think it's a good idea, because they're not going to get the management support, they're not going to get the resources, etc. And it will just fall apart because you're not getting that support.
Okay. And what do we mean by context of the organisation? What from a standard perspective? I mean, I obviously understand what context is, but in the context of the standard, what is the context of the organisation?
Yeah, so the question you should ask yourself is, why am I doing this?
Okay.
So that's the first part of it. Why is information security a good idea? And there's going to be drivers from different parts of the organisation. It could be because senior management are very pro-security, and at the end of the day, senior management are accountable when things go wrong. So if you've got paranoid management that are worried about cyber incidents and the things that we see in the press, etc., then it might simply be a management requirement. It could be a contractual requirement from a customer. It could be a legal requirement. So ask yourself, what are the drivers for me to implement information security, and what is it about the information that needs to be secured? Is it the confidentiality? Is it the integrity? Is it the availability? And then the other side of things is what sorts of things could prevent me being successful in terms of a management system. So we tend to recommend organizations do a PESTEL analysis, which is your political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental issues. Yeah, see, remember them all. They're all the issues that could prevent you from being successful.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So, and also, we've got interesting another question which leads us on to the next point, is what do you mean by an interested party? So you've sort of referred to them a few times. You've talked about internal, external, etc. What do you mean by an interested party in the context of information security?
Anybody that has a vested interest in the way that we manage information security. So for example, it could be an employee, and their interest would be that because the organization holds information about them, which could be sensitive information, sort of payroll information or medical information, that kind of thing, they expect us to treat that information appropriately, protect it appropriately. We might have customer information, so our customers want us to protect that information while we're processing it, etc. So they're interested in how we do information security because we've got their data. That's why they're an interested party.
So which then links back to, why are we doing this? Have we really understood it? And links back to, does our scope reflect the whole why we're doing it? Right, this is starting to make some more sense to me now. Thank you. Okay, management commitment. I think we all understand what management commitment is. That do what you say, don't just ask everybody else to do it? Is that resourcing? Is that what comes under that?
Yeah, and all of the above, any of those things, anywhere where management need to get involved. So that could be promotion of the idea of security, so leading from the front and being visible to your staff, etc., and telling them why information security is important. Reviewing and approving the information security policy, ensuring there's appropriate and relevant budget available for all of the processes that are required by the management system to be effectively operating. And that could be people, it could be technology, it could be other things that they're providing resources for. So anywhere where management needs to get involved, they should be visibly, demonstrably getting involved and leading from the front. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So that now sort of brings us on around to the subject that you've mentioned on numerous occasions. And the one thing I often hear about ISO 27001 is when people say, describe it, the first thing they say is it's a risk-based standard.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, what does that really mean?
So essentially, the standard is all about protecting your information. So you need to know what your information assets are, whether it is a customer database or customer information or HR information that exists in an HR database, etc. Understanding what could possibly go wrong and how much would it hurt the organization if it went wrong. So if somebody hacked into the HR database and then published everybody's HR records on the internet, how bad would that be for the organization? So it's about quantifying the chances of that kind of thing happening and the impact that would be felt by the organization should it happen. And so then therefore, once you've got the results of that kind of analysis, you can prioritize where the protection of those information assets need to be. Is it more important to protect the HR database, or is it more important to protect customer data, or is it more important to protect tomorrow's canteen staff menu, etc.? You should be able to work out which one's more important after doing the risk assessment.
Okay, and in the interest of information security, what is risk?
What is risk? So it's a combination of the two things that I've just mentioned. So we've got on the slide there, it says risk equals impact times likelihood.
Yeah.
So once you understand how likely it is that something could go wrong, for example, unauthorized access to the HR database is one of the things that could go wrong. Work out how likely that is. And then also work out how impactful it would be. And so if you think about it, things like that could be reportable to the Information Commissioner in the UK. Yeah. You're looking at 4% of global turnover as a worst case scenario. And we always go by worst case scenario, by the way, in terms of impact. And so when you multiply the likelihoods by the impact using some kind of scale, so we tend to use a 5x5 scale with 5 impact and 5 for likelihood being the worst, we can then put a quantity value on risk to enable us to do those priorities. So risk is a combination of impact and likelihood.
Right. Okay, and then from this you come up with your risk assessment. You identify other things you need to do, and then you need to make some decisions about, accept, or whether you're going to mitigate what you're going to do, which gives us our risk treatment plan, which is really where all the controls come in, isn't it?
Yeah, so organizations should have an idea up front of what their risk appetite is. So how much risk they are willing to accept or retain, and also what types of risk. There are different types of risk. There could be legal risk or operational risk or reputational risk, etc. And so there would be different amounts of different types of risk that they're willing to accept. So as you can see on the screen at the moment, we've got this risk matrix on the right-hand side. And what we've done is we've color-coded this, we've given this a rank status. And so we're saying that everything, when we've done those impact times likelihood scores, any risk that ends up in the green zone, we're willing to accept, and we don't necessarily need to take any more steps to protect it any further. But anything in the amber or red zones, then we're saying, yeah, we need to do something about this to actually reduce the risk to a more acceptable level. And so what you can see here is that item A on the top right-hand corner is what's known as the absolute risk. So this is the risk that exists if you do nothing. And then what we take into consideration after that is what is the effectiveness of your current set of controls, which gives you item C, the current risk. So it's slightly better, but it's still in the red zone. So then we make some recommendations for improvement of those controls, etc., and drive the value of risk down, and that becomes your residual risk, which, as you can see here, is in the green zone. So that becomes acceptable. So we can accept that risk at that point, therefore making it residual, the risk that's left over after we've finished implementing treatments.
And the bit that takes us from current to residual is what we identify within our risk treatment plan, yeah?
Yeah, so for each one of those risks, we make a decision on what we're going to do. If it's in the green zone, we're going to accept it. If it's in the red zone, well, we need to probably reduce it. And the way to reduce the risk is by implementation or improvement of controls. So this is just a very small sort of subset of the overall risk treatment plan and how one might look. But on the left-hand side, you can see the control reference. So there would be 93 entries basically in this risk treatment plan, assuming that all 93 controls are applicable to this organization. And so what we've got here is an idea of what the current implementation is in column 3, which gives us our controlled risk score. So on the top, we've got an 18. And then the recommendation is that, well, we need to go and do something to improve that situation by putting this control in place, which in this case is training and awareness. That will potentially improve the control maturity from a 1 to a 5, therefore reducing the overall risk score to a 4, maybe making it more acceptable.
Okay, and someone's just asked a question, if we could just maybe try and answer this briefly. I guess this is risk appetite. How do you decide on the level of risk to accept?
So that is a senior management decision that needs to be made. It's going to be based upon a number of different things. And as I mentioned earlier on, there are different types of risk that an organization might face, but one of the obvious examples would be financial risk.
Yeah.
So how much does it hurt from a financial point of view? What's the impact if any of these risks materialize? So if you can break that down into an amount of money you're willing to lose over a 12-month period, for example, then that would be the level of financial risk that you're willing to accept.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Anna. Thank you for dwelling on risk, because I think it's really important. So we talked about competence or competencies, and again, as a requirement of the standard, to understand what competence you need and have some form of plan to get there.
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. You should identify the key roles that are required for managing the management system and also operating the controls. In order for those to be done effectively, you need people that know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you should define what the competency requirements are of the role in the first place.
Yeah.
That will help you with recruitment, for example. Then you need to understand what the current level of competency is. So if I've got a person that's performing that role at the moment, I should measure their current level of competence.
Yeah.
Measure that or compare that with the competency requirement that I've defined. If there's a gap, then fill the gap, whether that's training or recruitment or whatever.
Brilliant. Okay. And implement security awareness program. I'm really interested the use of the word program. So this isn't just a one-off annual event.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. It's not something, everybody does security awareness during induction, but what you should be doing is staying on top of current trends and events and making sure that everybody is aware of what those things are, updating your training material accordingly every now and again, and ensuring that you roll out the training probably at least annually, but also back that up with regular sort of awareness programs, etc. You know, newsletters and that kind of thing.
So we want to keep it at the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah, and keep it relevant and up to date.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, so you talked about measuring the performance of the ISMS. So that's this kind of overarching framework and what it's doing. What exactly does that mean?
So yeah, you've got, I mean, organisations that are interested in certification are going to be kind of monitored and measured on an annual basis when BSI turn up to do the initial certification assessment, and then annually thereafter.
Yeah.
But obviously it makes sense to not just rely on an annual look-see by BSI to see if everything's working okay. So you should be really doing this internally as well, and much more granularly. So you'll be monitoring and measuring certain controls, monitoring and measuring the overall effectiveness of the ISMS, and do it often enough such that you can spot any trends. So probably monthly, something like that. So then you can spot to see if things aren't quite working, that, you know, things are going off track, certain types of security incident might be increasing. And if you can spot those trends, you can make changes.
And someone's asked the question, how do you monitor that the ISMS is being effective? Or what kind of things are you monitoring? Yeah,
so there's a couple of key mandatory requirements in the standard that help you with that. The first one is around setting objectives.
Yeah.
So we have a mandatory requirement to set information security objectives. So what am I trying to achieve? This goes back to context. Is it confidentiality of customer information, for example? So I'll have a bunch of objectives that I need to achieve within a certain time frame, etc. The other mandatory requirement that helps you with this is the management review. So there's a requirement for a regular management review who will determine whether or not the ISMS is working as expected. And there's certain mandatory inputs into those meetings, if you like, to determine if that's the case. One of them will be, are we meeting our objectives? Another one will be, how many red risks have we got? Are we reducing the red risks to green risks? How many incidents have we had? That kind of thing.
Okay, it's that kind of thing. All right. And then our final one, we talked about business continuity. Now, this is an information security standard. So kind of what's the business continuity requirement or connection?
So if you think right back to slide, well, one of the first slides I started talking about, the CIA side of things, this is very much aligned with the A bit, so it's availability, ensuring that your information assets are available to the people that need it, where they need it, when they need it, etc. And so therefore, there's going to be certain key processes or key pieces of information that are going to need to be highly available. So therefore, you should have plans in place to ensure that they are highly available.
Yeah.
And that if anything disrupts any of the processes that you've deemed to be key processes, that you have ways of either avoiding the incident and making sure you've still got access through another method, or recovering very quickly and effectively after the event. So it's about availability, and you need to ensure that you've got appropriate plans in place. Very closely aligned with incident management. It's just that it's an availability incident at the end of the day.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Wayne. So we're going to look at tips sort of gaining and maintaining. So let's just, Tom, you can help us out. What's the timeline look like? What does a pathway look like at a very high level? And then we'll go through some key tips.
Yeah, so I think the sort of the timeline of how quickly can you get certification tends to be one of the sort of the first questions we get asked when someone calls us up. And the answer really is it kind of depends how much resourcing you're willing to put into it. I think quite often when people ring us, they say, you know, I'm looking to get ISO 27001, and then they sort of have a bit of an awakening when you realise actually this is an assessment process. So there's actually requirements in place for the organisation to implement a lot of the controls and processes that Wayne mentioned earlier on. So at the top end of the slide there, you can see those are the sort of the requirements that an organisation would need to do before you can kind of begin that certification process with BSI. So depending on how much you're sort of willing to put in, an implementation timeline can be anywhere sort of between 6 months if you're wanting to kind of really go for it, or 18 months if you're wanting to kind of maybe take more of a phased implementation, to sort of anywhere in between for organizations who want to do something a little bit different.
Okay, and the actual certification stage is 2 stages, isn't it? Stage 1, more of a desktop review, you know, have you done the risk assessment, have you got a management system? And stage 2, when you want to see evidence, don't you?
Yeah, so the analogy we quite like using internally is it's a little bit like a driving test.
Yeah.
So stage 1 is kind of the theory element of it. We're coming in to essentially say, do you understand the requirements? Have you read and comprehended the standard? Have you created sort of those processes and selected the controls that you're going to be implementing? And then stage 2 is us coming and saying, okay, let's see it in action. So stage 1 we'll probably spend most of the time with the information security manager or kind of whoever's going to be project managing the implementation. Stage 2 is us saying, okay, let's talk to everyone else within the organization. If you say information security culture is something you've implemented, we're not just going to be sitting in a room. We're going to be going around and talking to those people in the sales team, HR team, operations team to sort of get that tangible evidence that you're complying with the clauses of the standard.
Got it. And then you hold a certificate for 3 years, subject to no majors, and typically it's an annual check, an annual review, and across that 3-year period you'll look at the management system every year and all the controls, I'm assuming. Yeah,
so the good news for people who are implementing is the bulk of the auditing is done in the first year during the implementation phase, and then sort of on an annual surveillance basis we do kind of that light touch auditing where we'll look at elements of the management system. As you say, over the 3-year cycle we'll have covered everything again.
Got it. And when typically we would advise organisations to look at it being around maximum a 12-month implementation period. Otherwise, you've got project tiredness, potential, but equally then you're going back around a lot of the redoing the risk assessment. So you're kind of going back around elements of that circle, aren't you?
Yeah. Although to be honest, sometimes that could be an advantage. So if you end up having to do the risk assessment twice, you should be able to demonstrate an improvement over the first time that you did it. So it does provide good evidence. But yeah, same with the audit side of things as well. If you did an audit earlier on and you've not done one for quite a while, you can't really rely on the evidence anymore. So yeah, some of those things may become a little, with the word stale, I guess, but they would also be repeatable. So
okay. And it's important to say, when something like BSI comes in to assess someone, you're not looking for perfection. You're not looking that everything on the risk treatment plan has been addressed. If it's not, there's a plan for it to be addressed. You're looking for that. We are on top of where we are of our information security management, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think it's quite important to say this is an assessment of information security management, not necessarily an assessment of information security. So we're looking to make sure those processes are in place for getting that improvement.
That's a great way of looking at it. Thanks, Tom. So now we're going to look at some tips, and we'll probably roll the pitfalls into it so we look at everything. So starting off, these are the top 3 tips from an implementation perspective. Tom, so can you walk us through them?
Yeah, so I think the first one is probably the most critical one here, of making sure leadership is engaged. So there's a specific clause for leadership in ISO 27001 and all the management system standards. And I think it's really important to make sure that those senior leaders know what's going to be expected of them from the management system and during the audit process themselves. Quite often this gets delegated down to an IT manager or someone like that, and those senior leaders think they can kind of wash their hands of it, but actually they're going to be heavily involved in this. So making sure they understand what their involvement's going to be, because that will also mean they'll understand kind of what sort of resourcing they need to put in for the implementation and the management system as well.
Makes sense. Okay, and it's also important to add that the leaders are expected to be involved in the assessment itself, aren't they? There will be interviews with leaders along the lines of what's it mean for you, why is it important, isn't it? 100%,
yeah, and our auditors will be spending time asking them some very, very probing questions.
Yeah.
I think one thing to mention there though is that there's the kinds of questions that they're going to get asked. They're not going to be technical questions around controls and things like that. It's going to be context and leadership type questions. Why are you doing this? Why is it important? That kind of thing.
Good. Second tip, I've had this one before, I think, don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff, hopefully, that I think you'll have heard earlier on in the presentation will come across either as common sense or probably actions that have already been implemented within your organisation. So just because you're going down the implementation process doesn't mean everything needs to be started from fresh. Yeah. If you've already been doing sort of risk assessments, for example, check them against the requirements of ISO 27001. If they work, use them as part of your evidence process. There's no need to start from scratch. And if you've already implemented other management system standards, like for quality, environmental, health and safety, there's a lot of common elements there that you can reuse. use. Document control is the one that I like saying. The requirements for that across standards pretty much identical. So if you've got one that works for your quality system, feel free to use it for information security. Doesn't need to be a brand new one.
Same with internal audit, management review, corrective action processes. Those processes all work across those standards.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say when we're helping people, what have we got? Gap analysis. One thing we often see is that there's a lot of actually working practices are there which align. They're maybe not formalised, and they make, that's the bit that's missing, which the standard, in truth, actually encourages you. I use the word encourage rather than force you to formalise a number of processes. But actually, a lot of the time, people are doing a lot of the things that an information security management system's looking for, isn't it? It's just formalising it.
Yeah, and tweaking it here and there to fit the specific requirements of information security, for example.
Yeah, which kind of leads us to make the standard work for you. The whole "don't be a slave to the standard," Tom.
Yeah, I mean the ISO 27001, it's written in the style of a framework, so you can use it as a helpful guide for your implementation, but don't feel the need to. If there's certain things in certain orders, you don't have to write it in that fashion. So management review, for example, you don't need to create a meeting that is called ISO 27001 management review. If you've got an annual or a quarterly sort of meeting already to discuss information security issues with senior leaders, feel free to use that. You don't have to create something just because of the standard says that you should have something for it.
Same with documentation. Just because it's a good idea to have an access control policy, it doesn't need to be called an access control policy. You could incorporate the content of such a policy into your workforce policy or code of conduct or whatever it might be.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we're going into the pitfalls. So we're going for certification, preparing for the audit. I'm slightly staggered by the first one, not having read the standard.
And I think you'd be staggered at the amount of people who kind of fall at the first hurdle for this one. And I would say if you kind of take any one thing away from this webinar, it would be if you want to implement ISO 27001, get yourself a copy of the standard.
Yeah.
When we come in as auditors, we will be assessing against the requirements of the standard. So effectively, if you've not got a copy of it, you don't know what the questions you're going to be asked are.
Yeah.
And it's the easiest way to sort of get an understanding of, this is what the auditor is going to be looking at, this is what they're going to be expecting, and this is what we know when we're going to be completed and ready for assessment. It's almost doing that sort of gap analysis against what you've got in place already and what the requirements of the standard are.
I would make that plural. Not having read the standards or by the standards, I would always recommend you buy 27002 as well as 27001, so you can understand the controls better as well.
Okay. Waiting for perfection, we've kind of touched on this, isn't it? This is about its continual improvement. And if you're going to sit and try and tell an assessor you've never had an incident, the assessor's going to know you're not managing your instance. And this is about, you can have things on your risk treatment plan, can't you?
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that also instantly sets off red flags for an auditor is if you've got an internal audit program that hasn't raised any non-conformities for a while, that's more of an indication that the internal audit program isn't effective than the actual organisation's got really good processes in place.
Yeah. Define the scope. We've spoken about this when you talked a lot about the scope. What is it you're expecting as an auditor? Did it have to be documented? What is it you're looking for?
Yeah, so it will need to be documented, and also it will need to be justified to the auditor as well. So you won't be able to do things like excluding particular high-risk activities out just to be able to sort of decrease the scope. If you've got a single office with a rack of servers in one corner of it, you can't scope 3 quarters of the office and leave those servers out of scope. You have to be able to cover reasonable risks within it.
Got it. And get dates booked in. Typically, if somebody was came to you now and said, I want to be certified, what kind of timescale are you looking at?
So if someone rings us up today, we could usually get an auditor available to them within 3 months. What we do always say though is 3 months is our kind of our shortest notice. The more notice you give us, the more likely your audits are to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The less notice you give us, the more likely the audit is to be a Monday or a Friday. So give us more time, we can create an audit program that's going to work for you.
Got it. Okay. So now looking at the management system in operation, 27001 used to be known as or people used to say it's an IT standard.
Yeah, and I think this is sort of where we see a lot of people fall down is obviously information security is not information technology. They're 2 separate things. I think we're coming up to Christmas now, and I think one of my favourite things to do is walk, whenever you're doing the Christmas shopping, walk past an office and see how many times you can see the phrase 2026 strategic plan written on a whiteboard through an open window. So, you know, information technology is going to be a very important part of it, but you're going to have all those other elements of it, those physical controls, those people controls that we mentioned earlier. They're going to be just as important as the IT side of things.
No, that's great. And shadow processes, what do we mean by shadow processes?
So what we often see when we're doing the audits is you'll see someone who's created almost like an idealized version of how they think the business does run, that will look good on paper, but then when you actually sort of go into the day-to-day operations of, you know, how are people delivering our services, producing our products, you quite quickly realize the reality of the situation is very different. So what you need to be doing is making sure, you know, those processes are embedded, it's living and breathing, it's what the organization is actually doing, rather than a dusty manual that's sitting on a shelf taking up space.
That makes sense. Conflict of interest, we've got 2 questions on this, and I'm conscious we've got about 9 minutes to go. Can valid internal audits be done by internal staff without being seen as a conflict of interest by the certifying body?
Yes, depending on how you do it and who does it. So the standard itself talks about impartiality rather than independence. So yes, you can use your internal staff as long as they're impartial and you can demonstrate that they're impartial. So you should have appropriate processes in place. Consider things like reporting line. So if they're auditing the IT department, then they shouldn't be a direct report of the IT director, for example. And also, obviously, if they're integral to implementing what they're auditing, then they shouldn't be auditing those things.
Okay. And then a follow-up question was, regarding internal audits, how do you conduct an audit into the internal audit section?
Get somebody else to do it. So somebody from another part of the business, or you could use somebody from the other part of the business as an observer, as somebody to demonstrate that impartiality piece.
Got it. Risk management, we talked about risk in quite a lot of detail. I guess the key thing is it must cover all in-scope information. Don't leave a key part out.
Yeah, that's the one of the key things. You've got to know what you have, and that may well require you to be going around the business asking questions of different people in different functions, etc., to understand what information assets exist. You'd be surprised how many times management are shocked at what information assets actually exist. I do this process with information security managers, and as we're discovering assets, you can see the look on their face because they didn't know that these access databases existed, and payroll spreadsheets were in shared folders and things like that.
Got it. And very briefly, can you do it in a spreadsheet? Does it work?
Yeah, sure. It depends on the complexity. So you could end up, if you think about, we've got the CIA thing, so for every information asset, you've got to consider confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's at least 3 risks. And depending upon the threats involved, etc., that could expand out to being more. So depending upon the number of information assets you've got, that ends up being quite a few line items in a spreadsheet. When it gets up to a couple of 100 line items, you might want to then consider using a tool of some description.
Makes sense. Okay, so actually carrying out the audit itself, now, despite the fact we do this, even when we're internally audited, I'm a bit like, oh no, the auditor's coming in. What kind of approach should you take?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're always kind of keen to get across to people implementing it is this is a voluntary process of business improvement. So you don't want to be sort of thinking about this as a punishment. The auditor isn't going to be there to sort of, you know, drag you over the coals, make your life as difficult as possible. You know, in BSI, when our auditor selection process, we're not just looking for people who've got experience of the standard, but actually who've got that sort of, you know, living and breathing work experience of being in the same position really as the people who are being audited. So understanding the auditor is there, they're going to ask you some difficult questions, but the reason they're doing it is because they want to uncover those issues that might be issues kind of later on down the line, give you some things to consider to help improve your organization. And I think kind of taking that approach with your internal audits can help sort of people feel confident when they're being put in front of an external assessor. If their internal audits are coming from a place of, actually let's look for improvement, let's make things better for everyone. That will make things easier during the certification process as well.
Brilliant. And briefly, legal compliance?
Yeah, so we kind of mentioned before on kind of context of the organisation. I think one of the important elements of that to consider is where are you operating as well.
Yeah.
So if you might have a head office here in the UK, for example, but if you're operating in the EU, you'll have a different set of information security and privacy requirements, or likewise if you've got places in the US as well. So making sure that everything that's in scope, you're keeping all the relevant legislation in mind for that as well.
Good. We've talked a lot about corrective actions. Back in the day, I think it was preventative. Difficult word to say, so I'm glad it's corrective now. What's kind of meant by that?
Essentially, the requirements that it used to, as you're right, it used to be preventive action and corrective action. But preventive action is all about making sure it doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you do a root cause analysis to determine the actual cause of the incident or the non-conformity. You correct that, but then you go and fix it everywhere else as well to ensure it doesn't happen anywhere else and can't happen again in the future.
Okay. Final point, Tom, and then I've got a few questions. Documented evidence.
Yeah, so when we sort of look at our stats of the areas in which we raise non-conformities, the number one clause is kind of document control. So if an organisation has said something is going to be written down, a policy is going to be updated, these particular versions are going to be used, it's really quite easy and obvious for an auditor to pick up when there's been issues with that sort of stuff. So if you've ever written anywhere down in your management system, this will be documented, this will be updated. It's a surefire place where that's one of the first places the auditor is going to look. So make sure all that stuff is tidied up before the audit.
Brilliant. Okay. So we've got a few client tips that people can look at just whilst I ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay, in addition that have come in. So can this work, 27001, for small startup organisations, i.e. keeping it lightweight, or does it end up becoming very bureaucratic?
Yep, it can absolutely work. I think I mentioned earlier on, we've definitely got organisations that are literally one-man bands. I have personally worked with a client who is an individual, he's a software developer, he's got a couple of key contracts with large organisations, and he doesn't have the time to be able to do, absolutely everything. If it was, you had to document everything and monitoring and measuring everything all the time, etc. So do what you need to do that's relevant for your business. It's about your business objectives. So yes, small organizations up to multinationals.
Okay, two more. How does a small business cope with the need for impartiality?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and is one of the ones that can be quite difficult to demonstrate. One of the ways, obviously, is making sure that you've got all your processes and procedures in place, and that you keep sufficient records to demonstrate that the procedures were followed, and you've got all the records, etc. But even then, it's a little bit difficult to demonstrate, and at that point, you might want to consider outsourcing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very quick one for you, Tom. At the risk of sounding stingy, why are standards not free of charge?
So BSI is a not-for-profit distributing organisation. So anything we do make from the sale of standards, we reinvest back into the standards development activities. So it's allowed us to kind of produce sort of the standards for kind of niche areas, which maybe necessarily wouldn't be commercially viable. So we've done some really kind of interesting stuff on obviously like the first privacy standard that was published and updated before there was the GDPR requirement. So they can seem pricey, but the money does go back to a good place.
Thanks, Tom. So very briefly, how can we help you? We have a lot of people who attend these webinars and go, that was great, what do I do now? So we've got three offers really from that. Firstly, a free 27001 health check. That's your opportunity to spend a couple of hours with someone like Wayne, walking through, okay, have I got something for this? Have I got something for this? Where am I? And give you an idea of what that certification journey is going to look like. Secondly, we do a one-day introduction to 27001, including the Annex A controls. That's running on the 11th of December, and there's a discount on that course if you've attended this webinar. And finally, if you're saying, no, I'm definitely going for certification, I really need to understand where I am, we do a 3-day 27001 gap analysis that probably spends equal time, I suppose, looking at the management system and then the controls as a whole, and gives you a report. And again, there's a price following on from this. Upcoming webinars next week's Building Cyber Resilience, a fairly high level, non-technical one looking at practical steps for reducing the likelihood. The week after that, Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. The C stands changing again, the questionnaire is changing. Recent incidents have put a real focus on some areas of that, so that'd be a really useful webinar. And then improving your organisation's resilience with 22301 that's been mentioned a few times. Please do complete your feedback form. And we'll share with you any of the material you ask for. Gents, thank you very much indeed for spending time with me. It's been really interesting. You've kind of made it an understandable subject, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for coming.